By this time, the warriors of the region took back the hitchhiker-infested towns, and as the warriors and hunters fought, they learned a lot about the hitchhikers. The hitchhikers could set up traps and mimic words from life, but they aren't capable of intelligent conversation. So, by asking open-ended questions, they could be easily confused and then killed either by destroying the brain, burning the body, or leaving the body disabled in the forest where the trees would grow over them. They were removed across a period of months, and when the towns were declared safe to move into, some of them were repopulated gradually. Other towns, including Nornglade next to Route 13, were never repopulated. The forest rangers were readapted with tactics against the hitchhikers and even a sidearm, which has proven a bit useful. However, the core mission of the forest rangers has not changed. They still seek out people lost in the forest at night, willing to save them even if it is dangerous. Some people argue it was the Rangers trying to be selfless that nearly wiped them out 40 years ago. The Chief Marshal usually responds to that statement: if being selfish is ever the only way to save humanity, then humanity is already lost. Our story is told by an exoteric hitchhiker traveling from the Empire of the Seven Cities to the Sunset Republic via the roads in the northern forest, mostly to escape her own parents and the authorities of both the kingdom and the empire. Pearl Jason Garrett wrote a lot about her many strange adventures, misadventures, and encounters across the highways of the northern forest. The excerpts we are focusing on are about her journey from Kamid to Nova West, including a truly unfortunate stop in Nornglade and Route 13. While Pearl does manage to escape with her life and her story, a lot of others did not, and her actions did trigger an eventual investigation by the Law Enforcement, or LE, branch of the Forest Rangers, and quite a few hunters into the ruins of Nornglade and Route 13. Please note the dates are an estimate because the author did not include dates in most of her writing, and her journey across the northern forest took over 2 years. January 8th, 2750 AUC. Leaving Kamid today, I had to leave behind the real city of Toronto last week for a bus ride west. 7 months of bussing tables to save for a bus ride, and now I am a 2-week bus ride to get to Quadra, the island just north of the Sunset Republic. Everyone told me that Kamid was a great city in the center of the northern forest. And I don't know who sold their dignity to call Kamid a city, but I hope they got their money back. There were no bars, the motel's pool stank of rotten eggs, and the movie theater was only showing out-of-date films from the last decade. Apparently, the movie theater has to buy them from Imperial movie theaters. Even if the town is slow and boring, at least we aren't here long. We made it to town 2 hours before sunset, and we are supposed to leave today at 8 a.m. I'm on the bus, and it's 9:30 a.m., and we still haven't started moving. Apparently, we are waiting on the extra gas canisters to get through this next leg of the journey. The distance to the next stop was so great that they don't want to risk running out of gas before making it to our next stop. The risk was so great that the driver was willing to go behind schedule for the gas. Finally, around noon, we finally had the gas canisters and we made our way west. The bus company isn't willing to put us up for another night in the motel. I guess the goal is to get to a small rest stop where there was a motel, so that way we were at least most of the way to Nova West, the next city. Though I had no idea if we were going to make it since the bus driver was driving at the same speed for the last few days. And sure enough, as the sun was starting to set, we were still kilometers away from the village. As the last of the light dipped below the horizon, the bus driver kept driving as the other passengers went from chatting to whispering. The northern forest is quiet, but it is creepy at night. As we drove on, we all stayed quiet, like being quiet would allow the bus to creep along without catching the attention of those that crawl in the forest. As the moon rose, the whispers vanished. A few of the passengers were sleeping, but most of us were awake and staring out the windows to see what lies in the woods. Deep in the shadows, we can see a few figures that might be human, or it might be human shaped. The eyes deep in the darkness don't reflect light, they just absorb the light, being double or even single orbs of darkness in the shadows. The ones who stand on the road are much worse. They stick out a single thumb as we breeze by, but you can tell they aren't living travelers. They don't flinch from the bus and they don't look up when we pass by. They remain on the road facing the direction of where the traffic should be coming from. Still, we thought we were safe, at least until the hitchhiker started standing in the middle of the road. The driver kept swerving to avoid them, and that unsettled me. According to the pamphlet in Kamid, hitchhikers acted like hitchhikers. They shouldn't be standing in the middle of the road, forcing the driver to swerve around them. And yet here we were, swerving around them. After a few minutes, it was quiet again, and the driver said, "We're going to have to pull over for the night. It's getting too dangerous on the road. There's a rest stop nearby. It isn't perfect, but at least it has a gate and a fence," the driver said, and there was a soft mumble, but no argument. Sleeping in a bus is unpleasant, but if the bus rams into a hitchhiker, then there would be no more movement forward, and stopping in the middle of the road was going to be dangerous too. The rest stop was a gated off area with a few buzzing lights and a concrete bathroom with a shower stall. Thankfully, nothing stood in front of the gate as the bus driver put the combination into the lock and it popped open. The rest stop had the number written on the lock, so if someone was able to read, they could see the numbers and put it on the combination lock. While beings like the hitchhikers and the fiends can't read, so they're not able to open the locks. The gate opened and we drove into the rest stop while the gate was closed behind us. Now in a safe place, we all got off the bus to walk around a bit and explore the tiny rest stop. It's nearly identical to every other rest stop I've seen. A few trash cans, a bench, bathrooms, and a shower stall. There are even a few street lights that buzz in the darkness with some solar panels on top of them to charge the lights. The only thing that separated this rest stop from every other rest stop is the fact it's surrounded by a chain link fence that's 3 meters tall, and there's no graffiti on the bathroom. Apparently, vandals don't want to drive into the middle of dangerous territory to mess up a restroom wall. Still, though, as everyone took turns in the bathroom, I walked along the perimeter of the fence, curious to see why this one area of the northern forest was seemingly free of fiends and hitchhikers. While the dead don't walk across everywhere in the northern forest, we are near the center of their territory. So, unless it was like the eye of a storm, there should be at least a fiend or something outside the fence trying to get in because there's light. Something I learned in the Seven Cities was it wasn't always the loud threats that were the gravest concern, but sometimes the quiet ones were the greatest threat. A city is always loud, but if at night it suddenly goes silent, something is deeply wrong. And here we were in a place that was supposed to be safe. It was quiet and it was empty. Quiet. It was quiet. I realized then something was very wrong. There was no whistling. Even in Kamid, you could hear the whistling at night. The fiends weren't whistling here. I couldn't see them, so they weren't staring at us from the outside. So, if there was no fiend outside the rest stop, where were they? I ran to the bathrooms where everyone was supposed to be. When I made it there was no one there. No one at all. I peeked into the bathrooms. There was no one there. No feet in the stalls, no one in the showers. There wasn't even a trace of people. The trash cans were empty, the sinks were dry, the bathroom still smelled like maple scented cleaning products, the shower still had travel soaps, and the stall was as dry as a desert. I wanted to test the sink, but I decided against it. Whatever was happening here, it seemed to have affected everyone else. Or maybe it only affected me? I wasn't sure, but I did know one thing. I wasn't staying out here. I went back to the bus, where the driver left the door open, but the keys were taken away. I checked through the seats and even in the bus's bathroom, and there was no one on board the bus at all. Thankfully, the bus wasn't clean like everywhere else in the rest stop, but I decided it was time to close the doors. Door release and lock thankfully didn't need the keys, but I closed the doors. I figured if someone came back, I could see them. I would wait here until morning, and either everyone would be here, or or I would have to walk the road and wait for a forest ranger to find me. Then I would explain everything I could, and the ranger would bring me to Nova West. While I sat in my seat, I thought I wouldn't be able to sleep. Somehow, though, I did fall asleep with my head resting against the glass. January 9th, 2750 AUC. When I woke up to smacking against the glass I was lying on. My eyes shut open, and I thought I was still dreaming when I saw what was outside. I knew I was awake when the hand smacked against the glass again, and the face smeared blood and flesh on the glass. It was the driver's face. I recognized the beard, but the face was torn to pieces. The right cheek was chewed through, and I could see the teeth inside and the half-chewed tongue. Muscle fibers relaxed and tensed in front of my eyes just a few centimeters away, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, I could see all of the passengers, all half-chewed and struggling to move, but all surrounded the bus. In complete silence. They knew I was there. How did this happen? What happened to them? Why were they like this? How did a fiend get inside the rest stop? My wondering continued for a few moments until I saw movement on the window. Something was crawling along the glass, and when I could finally get a look at it, I knew what it was. A squirrel. A squirrel with half of its face missing and the tail missing, all of its fur, so it was very rat-like in appearance. The sharp teeth tried to chew on the glass, but it was unable to get purchase, so it crawled away, leaving me alone, while I quietly thanked the bus for having windows that were all locked closed. Of course, humans weren't the only things that could turn undead in this part of the forest, and the rest stop was so focused on keeping human undead out, they didn't consider anything to keep smaller creatures out, such as squirrels. The squirrel must have bit them, and then the darkness spread amongst them, and they hid. Though if they were hiding, they're not fiends. They're much deadlier. Hitchhikers. They wouldn't leave when the dawn came. I was stuck in the bus while I waited for help. Now realizing I was stuck there, I laid out in the center aisle of the bus and I fell asleep. The banging stopped as soon as I fell out of view. Maybe they'll lose interest and when they can't see me anymore, and maybe something else will draw their attention away, like a deer, a wolf, or a pigeon with a machine gun. Anything to bring them away. January 14th, 2750. They still haven't left me alone. They're not really trying to get into the bus, but they're also not leaving me alone. They kind of patrol around the bus, but they don't go far. The toilet still works, thank the Emperor, and there's bottles of water and plenty of snacks in people's bags. But no one has come up the road. Not even once. I have no idea what route the bus driver took us on, but apparently there was no way it was an approved route. I finally jimmied the lock around the bus driver's seat and I was able to get in. The map was a little helpful. I checked the routes and the rest stops before I finally found our stop. Apparently the number on the rest stop is the same as the combination lock. Somewhere in the northern forest there was a very wealthy locksmith making combination locks that fit exactly the stops. Our stop was 1328, one of the rest stops on Route 13, a much shorter route than the Route 7 that also connects Kamid and Nova West. In fact, according to the map, the only connections between Kamid and Nova West are the two routes and a train line that is many kilometers away further north. Something odd is the fact that Route 13 is marked in red, that, according to the map legend, means the route is not meant to be accessed. According to the map, I'm 3 kilometers away from a red town of Nornglade, which is itself 4 kilometers from the Wintermourn bridge that would bring me to Nova West. The turnoff between Route 7 and Route 13 is nearly 20 kilometers back, and even if I made it that far, it would be an additional 40 kilometers down the winding road before making it to the Wintermourn bridge. A 60-kilometer walk through hostile territory to try and find a ranger definitely was not something that felt safe. 7 kilometers, on the other hand, felt a lot safer for me. That could be done in a couple of hours, easily. Although, with all of the hitchhikers outside, that was not going to be an easy way for me to escape. I checked the bus driver's seat to see if there was a radio, gun, or something I could use to signal for help. What I found instead was a multi-tool, a portable knife that was a lot more tool than it was weapon. Still, it was something, so I grabbed the knife and I checked around the bus. The patrolling hitchhikers were far from the driver's escape door. I guess none of them were smart enough to make that connection. Grabbing my bag and what supplies remained, I threw the door open and I raced towards the gate. The hitchhikers didn't even notice I was gone. Yet. By the time I got to the gate and got it unlocked, the hitchhikers let out a long moan as they made their way towards me. I silently thanked the stars above that the dead are slow and unable to run after me. By the time they swarmed around the bus, I was outside the rest stop and I locked the gate behind me to keep them from opening the gate. I began to briskly walk down the road heading towards Nornglade, walking down the center of the road, far from the edges of the forest. Thankfully, I saw no fiends nor hitchhikers along the road. Maybe they wandered somewhere else when they didn't have a bus nearby? I could hear the birds calling in the trees, deer moving in the brush, and I could see the movement of small animals in the forest. Rabbits hopped across the road, squirrels skittered, and robins skipped across the road. It was odd. Among so much death, there was still a lot of life. How did things survive against the fiends? Why is the forest full of so much life and it wasn't just a wasteland of death and decay, like all the movies and stories made me think it would be? As I kept traveling, I soon arrived at a tunnel dug into the mountain. I stopped at the mouth of the entrance. The sign next to the tunnel said it led to Nornglade in just 1 kilometer. Peering into the tunnel, I could see far on the other end was the exit. I could see the light, and enough light was in the tunnel to show me that there was nothing moving around inside. And as I listened carefully, I didn't hear any movement nor whistling. The only thing I heard was the whistle of the wind, not the whistle of the dead. I extended my hand out to the bottom of the sun, seeing how far the sun was from the horizon with my fingers. Only 5 finger lengths from the bottom of the sun to the horizon. I would have an hour and 15 minutes before the sun started to set, and then it would be sundown, and I would be in danger, on a road that no ranger traveled on. I faced down the tunnel and I began my trek into the darkness as I crept forward, trying to walk briskly but carefully. The light ahead was strong enough I could generally see ahead of me. There were no cars and no large obstacles as far as I could see, but that didn't help with the crunching beneath my feet. Each step forward there was dry crunching. It sounded like dry leaves and sticks as I stepped forward. And that was the lie I told myself as I kept stepping forward, ignoring the dry snaps and crunches. It was winter. The last of the deciduous trees dropped their leaves and sticks months ago. There wouldn't be anywhere near this amount in the tunnel after so many months. Most of it should have rotted away or at least stopped crunching. So, whatever I am walking on, it isn't what it sounds like, but I am not looking closer at it. As long as I don't look at it, I can keep telling myself I'm somehow wrong, that the sticks and leaves shouldn't be there. But the moment I look, the moment I try to confirm it, is the moment the illusion is shattered. Illusion has power. I know it's an illusion, and I have a strong idea of what is behind the illusion. But the longer I ignore it, the calmer my mind feels. It's a smart move knowing it's fake, but keeping it in place, and one that I've had a lot of practice with. I continue down the tunnel, feeling small bugs move around my feet. The beetles and roaches crunched and squished beneath my feet as I kept walking forward. Apparently, they find a lot of food amongst the leaves and sticks. I moved quicker as I could see the other end of the tunnel, and there was finally enough light to clearly see what was beneath my feet. Apparently, it was a lot of dried roots, which was an odd thing to be in the tunnel, but it did ease my anxiety even further as I stepped forward into Nornglade. I expected the town to be abandoned, but I didn't expect it to be overgrown. I had hoped it would have buildings that were still standing, places I could grab a snack, or maybe even miraculously have electricity, where I could find a working phone to call the Vanguard, or the Rangers, or at least a taxicab. The roots on the road crunched as I followed the road, barely more than a straight line without trees, as I saw the other overgrown buildings in Nornglade. At one point, I saw a tree growing over a no parking sign, looking like the tree was eating the sign. It was almost like nature was taking over Nornglade, and there was no humanity left. Not living, and certainly not dead. I continued my trek over the roots, and as the roots thinned, as I got away from the town, the sun continued to set in front of me when the impossible happened. A car was approaching. It was the faded olive green used by the forest rangers, with the sigil of a tree on a heater on the side. The car was driving on the left side of the road, heading towards Nornglade, with the sun behind it. As I waved the car down, I ran up to the passenger side door as I called into the car. "Hey there, can you give me a ride to Nova West?" I asked the ranger in the driver's seat. He looked tired and very pale, but he nodded, so I quickly got into the passenger seat as he turned the car around and began to drive directly into the sun, so I had to squint and turn away to not be blinded. "Thank you so much. You wouldn't believe the crazy day I had. I started as I began to explain to him what happened. As time went on, he made a left and we continued into the shade of the forest as I kept explaining, and then I made a mental connection. If we were heading south, that puts us back on Route 7 and away from Winterhome Bridge. So I stopped my story and I asked, "Where are you taking me? I thought we were headed to Nova West." I asked him, only for him to grunt before responding. "We have to take you down to the station first for questioning. Your bus was declared missing, and we have a lot of paperwork to fill out before we bring you to Nova West," the ranger said as we turned off Route 7 and began to head down a dirt path. The car rocked back and forth as we traveled down the dirt road, away from the sunlight of Route 7. I noticed the sun was continuing to dip lower, and underneath the foliage, it was already night. "Are you sure we can't do this at the station in Nova West? The sun is getting real low," I asked the ranger who pointed ahead. "It would take longer to head back. Besides, we're almost in Wintermourn," he said as he pointed ahead, and I could see it was, indeed, a small town on the dirt road. Although maybe calling it a town was overly generous. I could see the ranger station, faded with paint peeling, and most of the lights on the outside were flickering. There were a few cabins and a single dangling traffic light between four poles, though there were no intersections nor crossroads, just a light at the end of the road regulating non-existent traffic. The only cars in Wintermoor were the one we were in and a rusted frame sitting in front of one of the cabins. We parked in front of the ranger station as the ranger got out of the car, and I followed quickly. The sun was setting, and I could hear whistling in the woods as I followed into the ranger station. The waiting room was old-fashioned and smelled musty as I walked in. The magazines on the table were very old. The newest one was from September 2710. 40-year-old magazines. I knew a lot of waiting rooms took a long time to replace magazines, but this was ridiculous, even for the Northern Forest. "I need to replace these magazines sometimes," I tell the ranger who nods. "I'll let the boss know. Wait here, someone will come for you," he said as he headed deeper into the ranger station, locking the door behind him as I was stuck in the waiting room. Bored, I tried reading a few of the magazines, though it wasn't that interesting. I sat down and pushed through it. After an hour, I finished all of the magazines, and I made my way to the door heading into the station, and I twisted the knob. The door opened with ease, and I peeked inside, and the lock was broken. And the inside of the ranger station was even more run down than I expected. Half of the lights were flickering, and the musty smell was even worse inside. There were desks all over the station, but most of them were completely empty, and despite the musty smell, it was clean in that station. There was no trash, not even in the trash cans, no food, no mugs, no papers, not even pencils on the desks. And of course, it was completely empty. No people anywhere. I made it further inside, and even in the break room there was no one, and no food. Even the fridge and pantries were empty, not even dust inside. Someone is cleaning in here, but not restocking anything. I tried the sink and no water came out. Now I only had one place left to check. Upstairs. Behind the break room there was a stairway that led upstairs. The stairs were as sterile as the rest of the ranger station. No rubber on the steps, and when I made it to the top, the entire floor was quiet and dark, with the exception of one distant office. I stepped forward into the darkness, passing by dark offices, as I saw the open office with a nameplate next to it. Ranger Wrights was the name, and at the desk I could see the ranger was at his desk filling out piles and piles of paperwork. His inbox and outbox was full to the brim. He would fill out a paper from his inbox and then place it in his outbox. And yet, his papers weren't all that helpful. They were blank and only said the word paperwork on them over and over, filling every square centimeter of the white paper. Are you all right? I asked the ranger, who looked up directly at me, not recognizing me at all. He only opened his mouth wide, and a battery fell out of his mouth, one after the other, leaving half a dozen batteries on the desk as he continued working on his paperwork. Well, that's new. Can I go to Nova West, Ranger Wrights? I asked him, and I could see him shudder, and his eyes looked distant, and then he started to cry. I've not been Ranger Wrights for a long time. It's in me. It's in me. It won't let me go. It won't let me go. It won't let you go either. Run, he said as he spat up another battery, and his hand jerked towards me, throwing the keyring to me, presumably to the car. I grabbed the keys and I ran, and as I ran, I noticed that the ranger station wasn't clean like I thought it was. The walls were coated in old blood that smelled rotten. At each desk there was a dead body, their eyes plucked out, their fingers worn down to the bones, and they were still typing on the same typewriters. The blood-soaked pages were typed over and over again. No new things were created. Bloody ink was put on the pages repeatedly, while the dead kept working on it all. I ran by a janitor who was cleaning blood off the wall, only to pass by another undead who was using their own blood to write on the walls. Wintermourn, Wintermourn, Wintermourn. Repeatedly written on the walls in blood, only to be cleaned up and then written again. The floors were swept from body parts, only to have the body parts dumped into a trash bin that had others removing the body parts, leaving them on the floor. It was perpetual motion, an Ouroboros that never ended, always eating its own tail, and refusing to let go or even bite the tail. I scampered down the stairs, the dead not noticing me with their missing eyes, and they kept on their duties. The stairs had crying figures with no eyes. They were children, and I could hear them repeating the same phrase. When is help coming? They're still waiting for help, not seeing what is happening around them. As I made my way to the first floor, which was even worse than the first. Down here, I could see more of the weeping wights at their never-ending jobs. But unlike above, I could see signs of them trying to break out. Torn wires and ropes dangled from above, unable to let them die. A few still wore their nooses like neckties as they worked, their heads at an angle, their necks snapped, still cursed to weep, to haunt this ranger station. I could see claw marks on the walls as they tried to get out, and I ran to the door. Thankfully, it was unlocked, but the waiting room was even worse. Every seat but one was filled. I could see bodies in modern clothes sitting down and reading the old magazines, chewing on their fingers in boredom, revealing the bone underneath. And when the fingertips were exposed, they poked their fingers at their eyes, drawing chunks of their own eye down to their lips as they ate it. The only seat that wasn't filled was mine. The seat looked inviting. It even had a magazine for me to read. I tore myself away and ran outside, making my way to the car. Thankfully, the car was still normal. I drove away from that town. I could see there was a lot more in town than the cabins and the ranger station now. Buildings carved from the bone and flesh of the residents. Buildings that still breathed and moaned. Buildings that people fed pieces of themselves to, and that they tore pieces off to feed themselves with. Wintermourn was far too much for me as I drove down the dirt road and made my way to Route 7, following the signs to the bridge and then to Nova West. When I collapsed at their station, I tried to explain everything that happened. By the time I finished and I started listening to the ranger, he told me there is no such thing as a town named Wintermourn. There never was. As Pearl recovered in Nova West, the forest rangers sent men to explore Route 7 and Route 13. There were no dirt roads like the one described by her, nor were there any functioning rest stops on Route 13. There have been a few survivors found on the roads who describe a place called Wintermourn, but according to every official record, Wintermourn was never built. It was a township that was planned once, but the planning phase was never finished, so the building phase was never started. No one knows what is going on with the Weeping Wights. What is known is that sometimes they patrol the roads in vehicles identical to the Rangers. They're able to disguise themselves as living, and it isn't known how many people they successfully kidnap or consume. What is known is that approximately 1,000 people go missing every year between Nova West and Camid. Most of their bodies are never recovered. And what the bus driver was referring to as a town between Nova West and Camid is not known. There are no towns, no rest stops, nothing between the two settlements. Just the road and the forest. Whatever the Weeping Wights of Wintermourn wants, it isn't likely to be good for the many visitors of the northern forest.